everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Hunt Lift Eat podcast, brought to you by Hunt Lift Eat Official, with my favorite brothers.
The bearded brothers.
That's right.
Recently bearded for one of us.
Terry and Evan, what's going on, guys?
Oh, man, not much. Enjoying this, dude. The weather here right now is so sporadic. It's sunny. 30 seconds ago, it was pouring rain, and it's been doing that all day long. It was nice this morning, then dumping rain, then sunny, and so it's just been teasing me. But I will not complain about the rain. Helps the garden, helps the farmers.
So helps the turkey hunting sometimes.
Dang right. It did for me yesterday, boy.
I look like a freaking cherry tomato, dude. It's 1,000,000 degrees here. I just worked out.
Oh, yeah.
Pouring sweat.
Nice. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, we were just talking about one of Perry's turkey fans. I was asking him if he got his yet. What'd you ask me, Perry? What was your question? I don't even remember.
I asked you.
Wasn't listening.
Yeah. No, nothing unusual there. I asked you, how long do you normally let your fans go on the salt?
Yeah, so you trimmed it down good, right? You trimmed all this stuff off. Yeah, I usually, so the first time you salt it, I usually do two batches, whatever you want to call it, of salting it. The salt will turn hard. It'll draw out so much moisture from it, it'll turn hard. Once it's pretty hard to touch, or there's clumpies in there, you know what I mean? After usually 2 to 3 days, it usually gets that way for me, at least. I'll take it off, and then the fan will have its form, right? So you can undo your staples or whatever you use to hold the fan how you want it. Take it off, get all that old salt off. I usually dump it on weeds around the yard because it kills them. And then just salt it again, do one more cure, make sure you really get it in there. And the fibers, I think I showed you, I make a pile. I have little pieces of plywood that I have cut specifically for salt cure and turkey fans.
Of course you have.
Yeah, and I dump a pile, and I actually modified them this year. Another great little tip for DIY taxidermist at home for your turkey fans is it might be kind of hard to explain, but you have your piece of plywood down, and then I take a strip of 1x1 piece of wood that I actually started screwing to the turkey fans. It makes a little lip, right? And all that does is it keeps that salt from rolling, because obviously you make a pile, and that pile is gonna, so you put if you can imagine your whip, I'll hold it like that. So your plywood, if you're looking at it from a flat surface, like you're looking at a TV screen, that lip would stick out. That turkey fan base would sit right here, it would come like that. So then when you pour that salt on it, that would be laying down. You pour that salt on it, that little lip keeps all the salt from rolling off. So you don't have to use as much salt that way.
Ooh.
Yeah. But yeah, make your pile the second to really, really kind of rub your fan down in that. Make sure you get the salt in between the whatever you call it, I guess, in between the where the feathers are at the base. Really work it there
or whatever.
Yeah, and then dump it on top, and then do it a second time for another 2 to 3 days, and I've not had any problem with that. Like I salted a fan last turkey season that I'm yet to do anything with. And it's been in my shed salted, and it hasn't stunk. No, you know what I mean? No bugs, because I salt cured it until it was completely dry. The big thing is trimming it, removing all that goop off of it. Another thing to do, if I have a little wire brush after that first salt curing, I scrape it really good with that wire brush. And because, it hardens up some of that stuff and it pulls all that out. So just scrape the turkey fan on both sides where the little quills are. Works great. But that's my method.
I guess when you kill 5 birds a year, you figure out some tricks. And when you're like Evan, you save every fan from every bird you've ever killed.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually came up with a new taxidermist idea. I'm excited to show you guys. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm just going to send you a picture and show you. See what you get a raw reaction from you boys. Maybe I'll FaceTime you or something whenever I do it. But I'm pretty. It'll be a space saver, which the wife might be happy about. So I don't just have
turkey fans everywhere.
Yeah, I literally want Carter, like whenever I build a house in my office, I've already decided, like the top right where the ceiling meets the walls, I want a whole band of turkey fans 360 around the room.
On your way.
Yeah, I thought that'd be pretty sweet. Just have whole literal 360 of turkey fans in my man cave / office one day.
That would be freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Do you keep anything else off your turkeys? I know some guys will keep the legs with the spurs or keep the beards.
I keep spurs, and I have started making necklaces for the kids and just keepsakes. I bought some. I don't remember if I got them on Etsy or Amazon, somewhere online. I found like some leather strapping necklaces, and I think there was a pack of like 50 for very cheap, and I bought them and I kept them. And I've been, that bear I killed, been making some turkey spur bear call necklaces. They're pretty sweet, make pretty cool gifts for the kids. They're into that stuff. So hang one from your rearview mirror. If you're a freak like me and feels like he has to taxidermist everything he kills.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way, man. I just don't kill anything.
Yeah. Dude, I found a raccoon skull. I was not sure what it was when I found it. It was that first bird I killed down here, Perry. I don't know if I told you about that. I was crossing this little creek and there was a little pile of bones and there was a pretty intact skull. I didn't know what it was. I honestly thought it was a fox at first, and then I brought it home. I keep 40 volume hair bleach or peroxide for doing whitetail euros, and I filled up a small little cup with that stuff and put that whole skull in. It turned out really well. Then I started Googling it after I got it out and cleaned it up and rinsed it off, and it turned out it's a raccoon skull. But it's pretty cool, man.
That is sweet. I got a beaver skull like that.
Yeah.
Sound like the old our buddy old Scotty, the skull keeper, out there looking for roadkill. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Evan and his hobbies, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I have too many hobbies, man. God, if you look at my shop right now, it looks like the mixture of I've been saving all the scrap wire from these electrical jobs, and I've been stripping it just because, salvaging copper, right? And I'd say I probably have 30 pounds of stripped copper wire saved up, which is pretty good. I'm just going to keep doing it as long as I'm doing this, and then one day take it in. But right now, my shop looks like a mixture of like a gardener / woodworker / taxidermist / there's a welder out there, all this scrap wire, all this scrap wood. There's like a million different projects that are in the working phase. It's a mess. There's turkey fans sprawled out everywhere, and chainsaws and wood slabs and buckets full of wire.
What do you use for the forms of your fans? Do you use like push pins or?
I use a staple gun. So behind, if you pull back, and I just started doing fans. You know how they have the 3 layers of feathers? So you have the really small ones in front, then like that medium. And a lot of people only keep that mid-lip layer. I don't know what you really call them. I'm sure there's a scientific term. I use a staple gun. If you just peel back that layer of feathers to where the staple gun doesn't really damage the feathers from my experience. If you're meticulous about it, just don't quickly start jabbing them in there. But I do it behind that layer of feathers, just pull them back a little and staple them down. Yeah. And, like I was telling Perry, I put a salt pile down and then do one side, get it, perpendicular or wherever you want it. It's obviously dealer choice. And then staple that one, then I go completely opposite and staple that one to where it mirrors it, and then just work my way on each side, left, right, all the way to the center. I don't staple every single feather. Sometimes you only have to staple 2, maybe 3, 4. It just depends on that specific fan, on what movements I need to do, like how I need to modify it or mold it there, so to speak. But then I use when I actually do the mount, I use a hot glue gun. I know some people use epoxy, some people don't do anything. And what that does is, if you salt them good, you're not going to have any smell. You shouldn't have any smell. But what that does, is if there is any, tissue or meat left on the little fans, if there shouldn't be much, there's always got to be something left, some little, fat residue tissue sitting there that you don't get scraped off. It's going to be salted, so it shouldn't stink. But over time, who knows? Everything decays, right? So I started using a hot glue gun and just layering it on there. And it obviously will, because it's hot, it finds its way in between all the little quills, all the little whatever you want to call them, and it makes the fan rock solid at that point, so it won't move. And there's different mounting brackets you can get. The taxidermy idea that I'm coming up with, I'm going to make my own out of some oak pallet boards. I'm pretty excited for it. That'll look pretty good. So
you have to send us some pictures so we can post.
Yeah, I will. I sure will, man. I need to start videoing some of this stuff somehow. I'm just terrible about that sort of thing.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah.
All right, boys, I want to hear a turkey story. I want to hear 2 turkey stories.
We got it. Yeah.
Boy, do we got
them. Yeah, we're not short on those as of late. Where do you want to start?
Well, I need to get my fix. So, Perry, let's hear about yours first, man. I want to hear the story and the breakdown, and if there were any lessons learned, what you guys did differently this time.
There were lessons learned for sure.
Evan told me at one point you said, I hate turkey hunting, and then you may or may not have killed one pretty soon after that.
Yeah, I think it was probably about 20 minutes after I looked over at Evan and said, I fucking hate turkey hunting, that I had one dead on the ground. I looked at him and I said, man, I love turkey hunting. That's exactly what it is, right? It's love-hate.
Definitely highs and lows.
Yeah, highs and lows for sure. So, started out over at one of the family farms over at Peach Bottom, and Evan was over on the Cox farm. We started out in separate places that morning. And spoiler alert, Evan actually killed one before I did that morning. We doubled up that day, killed 2 in the same morning. So I'll let him tell his first, but I'll kind of set the stage. So we haven't been seeing that many longbeards out at Peach Bottom. We've been seeing a ton of jakes, and there's a pretty cool jake story that we can get into later if we have time. But there's been a
Jake killer didn't come up this year.
Do what?
Because the old Jake killer didn't come up this year.
Yeah, that's right. Mr. McKenzie, the Jake Slayer. Yeah.
No Jake is safe.
Yeah. Well, so we've been seeing a ton of Jakes, but not that many Longbeards. So Evan decided to hunt out the Cox farm. Got some intel from Doug, Luke's dad, that there were at least a few Longbeards over that way. And I was hunting Peach Bottom. So I set up and didn't hear anything. Got out there early, and for a couple of hours didn't hear the first gobble. Nothing. I mean, it was just one of those quiet mornings. And Evan and I were going back and forth. The bird that I have been seeing out there at Peach Bottom has certainly been using other properties at times. There's definitely one known roost spot. He did not roost there. There's another spot that we think they use fairly often. He did not roost there either. So I don't know if he roosted off site or where he was exactly, but he wasn't there. He's still alive. We actually got a picture of him on the trail camera just the other day. So
I heard him yesterday. I mean, I guarantee it was that bird because it was that area, you know.
So the bird's still alive. He just wasn't there that particular morning. So Evan and I were going back and forth, and sure enough, he killed a bird. And I'll let him tell you that quick story, and then we'll get back to mine.
Yeah, it was a kind of a chaotic morning. It was a highs and low turkey hunt. It was frustrating. Not for once. Well, I shouldn't say for once, but it wasn't frustrating because of things I was imparting or things I was doing wrong. Nature itself was making it frustrating. You know, how things shook out. I was positioned in a great spot. I hunted the Cox farm very hard last year, turkey hunting, and did not connect. I don't know if any listeners remember hearing some of the sagas of that when we did this, same podcast last year, basically. But I actually got close to connecting last year, and then my shotgun misfire did not go off. The bird spooked at the metallic sound and flew off the ridge, and that summed up my hunting at the Cox farm. But I got a lot of intel, and I learned how to hunt that place. And so for the listeners to envision this farm, it's next to a river in the Appalachian Mountains, and it is steep country. Carter has been there. It is very steep, even though our other farm on Peach Bottom is only about a 15-minute drive away. It's significantly different. Now we have a bunch of hills and mountains on our farm. It's just the how it lays topographically is not as steep. Those river hills up in that area is just brutal. And last year I was making a lot of mistakes by trying to run and gun, trying to locate and then move on those birds. And I learned quickly that how those birds move there, they want to get high and stay high. And if you spook them, they will come back to the high tops. Well, I was trying to use low ground to move. And then if one gobbled on a ridge, I would try to get to that ridge. And then turns out I would get to that ridge, it would take me an hour or more sometimes. I would get to that ridge. I would strike him up, but he would gobble and he would be on the ridge I just left, So I learned basically the hard way, to sum up last year's lessons there, to just, that's one of those places, if you get one to respond, just camp out. Now maybe reposition on that ridge, but don't change elevation necessarily and try to cross a ridge. If he's responding to you, let him come in. And there's a few spots that I kept seeing turkeys move. And I knew where they were roosting, and sure enough, they were roosting right where I thought. So now jump forward to this season. I know in that intel, I kind of went into it blind, but I did have a leg up. Doug told me, Luke Stad, the owner of the farm, he had called me and told me he had seen some good birds out there, and kind of told me where they were, and it made perfect sense for where I saw them all last year on the intel I have. So I didn't roost one, hadn't even scouted there. I was pretty confident in where they were going to be, or at least where they wanted to go. And so I sat up there, and sure enough, I had turkeys gobbling on cue, 25 to 30 minutes before the sun rose. And I was texting Perry, I've got a bird to either side, and I positioned myself right in the middle. I actually positioned myself. It's in this the conjunction of the corner of 3 hayfields, and there's 2 gates about 60 yards from each other. And it was actually one of the gates that almost makes like a little ground blind, because there's some horizontal wooden braces for that gate post that you could hide behind, and it makes like a perfect barrier. And that's where I had that misfire last year. But that other gate is where I positioned this time, just so I could see kind of down this little drainage and across where it sounded like the majority of the turkeys were. It turns out there was 3 longbeards. I only heard one gobbling on the roost. It could have been, how they gobble right on top of each other. It's hard to tell. They weren't, I wasn't like right under the roost. I wasn't 100 yards away. I was probably 300, 400 yards away. But I definitely knew the ridge they were on. And then I had what I thought was longbeards, turned out to be jakes, and I could tell there was multiple off to my left. And so I'm sitting there, they become extremely responsive to my calls. And then I had some turkeys gobbling across the river on the neighbor's property. So I was covered up in action from at least I was hearing gobbles, Perry was not. And sure enough, I could tell they were started to move towards me. What turned out to be the jakes, I didn't know at the time. And a lot of people might, call me an idiot for not being able to tell the difference between a jake and a tom gobble. I mean, these things sounded like mature birds, and they fooled me. I thought they were toms, and they were off to my left. So I'd kind of repositioned in that area and turned towards them, and I saw them coming towards me across a ridge, and they were walking right towards me, and they were going to drop down, and they came right on the road and up through that gate. I saw they were jakes. And I'm watching them, and something told me, like, all right, I haven't looked back to my right down that other ridge where I heard those other gobbles, and I haven't heard any gobbles down that way in a few minutes. And I turned slowly back to my right shoulder, and sure enough, I see a head just, telescoping up, straight up, and just the body standing in that green hayfield. It was it was stuck out like a sore thumb, and he was looking, and I thought he had seen me because I turned my head. He didn't. He was just looking for the hen, and I had Jake and hen decoy out in front of me, which I don't think he could see. The Jakes could see, but I don't think he could based off where he was. But the Jakes gobbled, got him all PO'd, and he came running. He started running when he heard those Jakes gobbling. Well, when he started running, another one came up over the ridge and started running too. Well, preface this, the whole time as the sun's coming up, I realized I had deer out in the field, and one of the deer was a little buck, and I think a lot of them were little velvet head bucks. I say little, one was actually a really good sized deer, so it could have been a pretty good buck. But they did not like my decoys, and so I've got deer that are like, doing this number, doing the stomp, not not blowing at me, not concerned about me, but they're looking at my decoys and not sure what to think about the decoys. The whole time I've got two groups of turkeys coming in. I've got Jake's to my left, I've got Tom's to my right and kind of front, and then I've got this deer between me and the Toms. I've got like 5 to 6 deer between me and the Toms. Well, those turkeys start running, and I don't know if that got the deer excited or what, but now the deer are running around, and a bunch of the deer, they run. Well, then one of the Toms, he must have not liked that. I don't know. He stopped and did an about face and ran back across the hill. I have no idea why. And I was like, well, okay, one of them kept coming. I can't see him now because he dropped in the defilade. And I barely turn over my left shoulder and I can't see the Jakes anymore. Well, how I was positioned, if I couldn't see them, that meant they were within 30 yards. Right. Well, then I start hearing them walking, not hearing them like making noise, like hearing them walking in grass, which if you spent any amount of time in the woods, if you hear something walking in grass, it is fucking close. It is not far away, especially wet grass with dew on it still. It was not even, what time did I kill that bird, Perry? Like it was before 8, wasn't it?
Yeah, well,
around 8. Yeah. So the grass was wet. Well, these Jakes, long story short, they come. I'm leaned up against the gatepost, Carter, like leaned up against the gatepost in an open gate and using that gate as kind of structure. And I'm sitting in a leafy suit, and the grass is relatively tall. The grass is about, when I'm sitting down on my butt and my knees are up, the grass is about as high as my knees. So honestly, I had pretty good concealment there. My decoy bags were laying to my right like right in the middle of the gate. I'm locked up, not moving, because I know these Jakes are right behind me. I'm not trying to spook them. I look to my right because I catch movement just with my eyes. Like I peek with just my eyes over my right shoulder and I see a bird. I could have grabbed this thing had I had my hand positioned, and it stepped on my decoy bag. I mean, that's how close I can hear them. They're making their little turkey noises that they make at this point. Well, they must have seen something they didn't like, probably the human sitting in the gate, 1.5 feet away from them. And they start putting. It's the worst sound you can hear when you're turkey hunting is that put of death. So they start putting and they booger out of there and fly across the ridge. I was like, oh, great. And I'm thinking that Tom is going to spook. Well, they fly. The deer, the last of the deer run off at that point. So I'm pissed off because at first everything was working out great. I had Tom's charging in, you know what I mean? I thought I was going to have 2 Toms come in and just absolutely demolish my Jake decoy because they got pissed off when they heard those Jakes gobbling. And turns out, one of them ran from the deer. I'm thinking ran from the deer. And then these Jakes flew. Well, so I start standing up because again, I couldn't see that Tom because he was behind this little micro terrain. So I start easing up. I didn't want to just jump up because I didn't know if he was in gun range. If I knew he was in gun range, I probably just would have jumped up and tried to torch off a shot, but I had no idea. And I peek up and I can see him. And luckily his head was down at this point. So I see his back line. I'm like, okay. And I belly crawled up to where I could get a little bit of vantage through the grass. And I ranged him and he was like at 120. Obviously not within shotgun range, right? So I'm thinking to myself, what's my play here? Because he's not coming towards me anymore. He's definitely alerted to all the activity that's happened up there and not feeling comfortable coming in after those deer ran off, after the Jakes flew. But he wasn't spooked, right? Like he was not confident in coming in anymore, but he wasn't vacating. So I had that fence, and because that hill that he was kind of behind, that was super shady, and I'm wearing a leafy suit, I'm like, man, I'm going to try and literally slither my way through this, 1.5 feet, 2 foot tall grass. And every time he has his head down, I'm just going to low crawl and drag my shotgun. So I left my rangefinder because I felt like I needed that, but I dropped everything. I slid my vest off. I slid everything off except my gun and my rangefinder. And I just start snaking my way down there, man. And it felt like it took hours. It obviously didn't. Fast forward to where probably 15 minutes of slinking through the grass, and I range him, and he was at like 80. And I'm thinking, all right, 40 more yards to go. I've been about 40 more yards to go. I keep going, and he was kind of moving towards me a little bit. Well, I think he could see something in the grass, but he wasn't sure of it because he would look every now and then put his head back down. And I could tell that I think he was about to vacate the premises. And so I took another range, and I forget what did I told you, Perry? Was it 50 something, 60?
I think
It
you
was a
said,
poke.
yeah, it was like 55.
Yeah, it was a poke, man.
What are you
But he would.
comfortable out to? Like, what would you pull the trigger on?
I had told myself 50. I had shot my shotgun at 50. I just put a new choke in my shotgun, and it's shooting pretty good at 50. I shot 3 rounds this year with that new choke at 50, and they were all lethal. They all were lethal. It wasn't as many pellets in the vitals as I wanted, and so because of that, I told myself, like, all right, I'm going to be prepared for an immediate follow up shot. And at that distance, I wasn't aiming for his head. I full transparency. Again, might be an unethical shot. I don't have a ton of experience shooting shotguns at that distance. But what I was thinking is if I aim center, basically at the base of his neck, not at the middle of his neck or his head, where you would typically aim. I usually aim at the middle of the neck for turkeys. But I aimed basically, where a sternum would be an equivalent. And I was super steady, and I was like, man, I had it in my head. I'm going to pull the trigger a second time. I'm going to shoot. I'm going to acquire the target again and shoot again at that distance just to get more pellets, 2 volleys of pellets out there. And that's honestly exactly what happened. I didn't need that second volley. I shot, and it folded him, man. I mean, it absolutely folded him. And I immediately shot again. And just because at that distance, I was like, I don't want a wounded bird,
Yeah.
And I told Perry, like, that's not a shot just because I made a shot at that distance. That's not a shot. Like, oh, my new range is 55 yards. No, not at all. Not at all. If it would have been in the timber, no. But because it was an open field, there was nothing that was going to eat any of those pellets. 100% of those pellets were going towards that bird. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I hauled ass, man. I was soaking wet. I told Perry I literally had water dripping off my shotgun barrel from sliding through the wet grass in the dew. I mean, I was drenched because the grass was 1.5 2 foot tall, and it was soaking wet from dew. But I hauled ass down there running and grabbed. It was funny. Literally, I was standing on his neck. The bird was expiring. I was standing on his neck, and Perry texted me, you still hearing gobbles? And I sent him a picture of me standing on his neck. He said, not anymore. But yeah,
then.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I was like, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I haven't heard a single gobble all morning. I haven't standing on a dead bird.
Yeah. But I told Perry, I was like, man, if you're not hearing anything, I said, pack it up. It was like I say, it was 8:15 at this point.
Yeah.
I could look at text messages, but we had hours to hunt. So I texted Perry, I was like, man, pack it up over there. I said, grab me a bag of ice at the gas station and I'll meet you at the barns. I'll start getting the meat off the bone and we'll go back out for you.
Because you told me there was another one there with that one. So
yeah.
That's exactly what I did. At that point, I grabbed all my stuff and I made a beeline back to the truck. Ran by the gas station to get some energy drinks and some ice and headed over to the Cox farm. So I got over there. Evan was cleaning up his bird, and we went basically back to the same spot. We drove down, parked the truck, kind of in the same spot that Evan started out, and set up very near there because again, it's kind of centrally located, and it's one of the high spots, and you've got another ridge kind of to your right. You've got another ridge kind of back behind you, and then another ridge to your left, and so there's high spots all around. And so I asked Evan based on kind of where it seemed like they were roosting and kind of the circular rotational path that it seems like they like to do throughout the day. What would make sense. And so anyway, we wound up back there. So we went and set up. It's what, like one gate over from where you killed yours, Evan? So probably what?
Yeah, it was the same gate where I had that misfire the previous year.
Yeah.
And I told, having that intel last year is the reason Perry and I both were successful for his hunt. And like knowing that farm, that's what I told him. I was like, we need to get high and stay high. We will eventually strike a bird. Like I was confident in that. Anyway, good bird.
So got set up over there, and Evan called, and sure enough, did strike a bird. They were down below us.
What time of day is it, Perry?
By this point, it was 9 o'clock. 9.
Oh.
Nah, probably a little later.
Yeah, I was just say you got there around 9. I looked at my watch when you got there. It's around 9, and
so
then
probably
9:30. 9:30. Yeah. So we had roughly 3 hours to hunt.
Yeah. So, some birds answered back. At first, we just heard one gobble, and we hadn't really got totally set up yet. We were just kind of where we ultimately sat down. They were kind of down below us. There's some thick, planted white pines that go down below this ridge down to a bottom, and it sounded like they were down in there somewhere. Waited a little while, called again, and then we thought we heard 2 gobbles. And again, it was really difficult to tell what they were. And all the jakes that we had been seeing on the other farm and hearing them gobble like that morning that Evan and I had that crazy encounter with the jakes, those birds were gobbling their faces off, especially the one kind of dominant jake. There was one in particular out of that group of jakes that was clearly bigger and more dominant than the rest. And he would gobble, and we thought for sure he was a longbeard until you actually could see him and see that he didn't.
And he was, I don't mean to cut you off, but he was strutting like a longbeard. I mean,
oh yeah, he was acting like a dominant bird, 100%.
So he's going to be the guy next year.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, he was. You know how sometimes jakes don't have that full gobble. Like you can some jake gobbles, you can tell like, okay, it's a juvenile turkey. This one did not have that. Like he had the bass in his voice. Like you could feel that percussion when he was gobbling close. Like it was bizarre. I mean, it was it fooled us both. Anyway, go ahead, Perry.
So these birds were responding to the calls. Felt pretty confident there was more than one, and Evan had seen that group of jakes. So not really being able to tell based on the gobbles what they were, we kind of made the assumption that it might be those jakes, but we wanted to let it play out and see. We had plenty of time. So we decided just to sit tight and see what they did. So Evan went and set the decoys up kind of on a little knob in front of us. We sat with our back to those fence panel braces, same way he described as last year. And the birds started working their way kind of from our right, kind of from 3 o'clock back to 12 o'clock. And it sounded like that was the direction they were going. And we're hoping that they would come out in the field above us and then kind of circle back to us and come into the decoys within range if it was going to be something that we wanted to shoot. For a while, it seemed like that was going to play out. But then at some point, for whatever reason, which I've given up on trying to predict turkeys, there's times where it feels like they're very predictable, and there's times where they just leave you guessing. At some point, they changed direction, and they started going back. At least it seemed like they did. It seemed like they started going back from the direction they came from. Now, with this topography and how steep it is, and the fact that we had these thick pines below us, it is sometimes hard to tell where the gobbles are coming from. Right, the gobbles bounce off of the ridges. They get caught up in the thick woods. Sometimes it's very difficult to locate them, based on gobbles if they're not, 100 yards or less. But it sounds like
even at close distances, man. Like I told Perry, I had a situation last year where I had a gobbler on a different farm that I had permission to hunt, and he was coming, and at one point he dropped in this little valley, and I knew he dropped in that valley. I saw him coming through the hardwoods way out of range, watched him come down in that valley, and when he was in that valley, it sounded really close, because he was. When he dropped in that valley, he sounded like he was 300 yards away. You know what I mean? And he was within 60. So those hills can definitely trick you, which can ultimately lead to a busted hunt if you're not careful. Like, oh, you think he's leaving, and then you go to get up, and he's actually coming in because of microterrain or whatever.
Or he was facing a different direction, and made the sound change how it sounds. So it sounded like they started going back the other direction. There's a ridge or like a knoll really of hardwoods kind of behind us, and it sounded like they might move kind of that direction, which if that was the case, that would be fine, because then we would basically just turn around 180 degrees, be facing that way, and perhaps they would circle basically just from the different direction. So we kind of had that in the back of our heads. While all this is happening, there was a couple of times that Evan and I heard a different gobble. It was not with this group. And we had a hard time telling where it was coming from. Again, it was far off, sounded relatively far off, and it was just really hard to pinpoint. But there was definitely another gobble that would respond to some of Evan's calls. So finally, we wound up shifting slightly to try to see if we could get in a better position on the ones that we were hearing close. They changed. We went back to where we were. We sat there for a while. Sounded like they were working away from us, and so we discussed it. We made the decision to move. We're going to go set up in a different spot.
And the reason for that, so to give some listeners some tips, and I told Perry this for an encounter that he and Luke had. A lot of times, if you have a bird that's hung up, and you can, if the terrain allows you, and you move locations, don't move towards the bird, but if you move adjacent, you know what I mean? If that makes sense. Like if you move, 50 yards to your right, 100 yards to your right or left, that movement and that calling will mimic a hen that is moving. So it makes it obviously sounds realistic because turkeys don't just stay in one place. Now, again, you really have to pay attention to the terrain. I don't recommend doing this on a bird that's gone silent because you don't know if he's coming in and you're likely to spook him. But if he's still gobbling but not committing and you can tell he's not committing, moving that 50 yards can sometimes be enough to draw him in or get him to change up his movement so you can manipulate that bird a little bit. So that was kind of our thought process. Is this what I told Perry after 30 minutes of working these, Perry, maybe 45 minutes. It wasn't a short amount of time is what I but that was our thought process for this move. It was a tactical play to try and entice these birds to be a little more aggressive.
And they were still obviously down below us. There was a ton of those thick pines. There was minimal risk of them seeing us if we were stealthy and moved with intention. So we made that decision. So Evan, I got my stuff together and Evan started crawling up the hill to go grab the decoys. And I'd turned around at this point, kind of facing the ridge behind us, since that was kind of the direction that it sounded like they were going, just to have eyes that way, while Evan goes to get the decoys. And a couple minutes go by, and I look back, or maybe you like hollered or kind of whispered. I think you started crawling back to me, and you're like, and he goes, "Perry, there's longbeards right over there where I shot mine. They're coming right towards us." I was like, are you fucking? I was like, are you kidding me right now?
I would give anything, Carter, to have a little video of Perry's face when I said that. It looked like a kid that you told, Santa's coming.
Because we had no indication that there were birds from that direction. That was literally where Evan had killed his a couple of hours ago.
Well, they were henned up. There were two hens with them, and I told Perry, I was like, "There are two hens, but the hens are working towards us, and those gobblers are following."
Yeah. So we're like, all right, let's crawl up there. So same kind of play. We dropped all the stuff, and we decided to crawl slightly up the slope through the grass, same as Evan did earlier, and get on that next gate where he killed his, and try to get in a position. The mistake we made here, one of the mistakes, was when Evan crawled up there, he took his rangefinder. We dropped all of our stuff other than my shotgun. Evan had his diaphragm call, and I had my shotgun, and that was it. And we dropped everything else. I dropped my bino harness, and it had my rangefinder, and Evan did the same. That was a mistake. We should not have done that. And here in a second, you'll find out why. So we crawl up there and get set up on the gate, and I'm set up right on the gate post. The gate's open. Swung out to my left, and I position where the birds were kind of think they're coming from, right at the 12 o'clock where my barrel is. And Evan is right behind me over my right shoulder. I'm down kind of as low as I can get on my butt with my gun propped up on my knees, hiding behind that, that grass. And Evan's just slightly higher than I am, so he can see just a little bit, higher than I can over the grass.
Well, that was also a tactical play. Again, I want to throw out some tips here, Carter, if you don't mind, while we're doing these for the listeners. And it piggybacks off that tips episode we did with the three of us about turkey hunting, where I was telling people that my success, the reason I've been successful is not because I'm a master caller. It's because I have learned a lot on how to move on turkeys. and I positioned myself behind Perry because we're next to a gate post, right? So you're using a vertical structure. So instead of having two people next to each other, next to a vertical structure, that's going to stand out more. So I'm using Perry's body to block my body, if that makes sense. But he's behind his gun. So I'm peeking up over his hat. You know what I mean? So I'm only 4 inches up higher than him, but that 4 inches I can see a lot more. So I have my hands on his shoulders, and as the tom's moving, I'm turning his gun on where the bird is because he can't see it. Like that's literally how we're doing this. And so to give the listeners like a visual description of that, I'm like talking to Perry and I'm moving him. I would turn his shoulders, but like the hens are right there, the gobblers are right there. You know what I mean? And I'm turning him in 6-inch increments.
And I still can't see him because I'm down so low in the grass. But just that little bit of difference, Evan can. Like I said, he's guiding me and making some slight adjustments down the barrel of the gun.
And also, on another tip is I would not call. I was calling a little bit. I would not call where they could see me. Before I would call, I would duck back down so they couldn't see me. I couldn't see them. Then I would call. I would wait before I would poke back up because I know when you call, their heads are going to do what? Boop, and look. They're going to stop and look. And so I would dump down, do some soft yelps. I wasn't cutting at this point because I already did a bunch of cut sequences and they were moving towards you. And most turkey hunters know if they're moving towards you, don't get super aggressive because that can halt them. You know what I mean? And think that like you're coming to them. So I was just doing like some really soft yelps.
And they were not responding. I mean, they had 2 hens with them. It was two long beards and 2 hens, and they weren't responding, but they were coming. And
the hens were coming.
Yeah, the hens were coming, and the long beards were following them. This was the point where we should have brought our rangefinders, and in hindsight, before they got kind of really up into view, we should have taken a quick range because there's this little spur ridge kind of out in front of us. And Evan said, when they come up over that spur ridge, you'll be able to see them. And at that point, it was a poke. It was going to be a poke for sure. But I think you even said, Evan, like you were feeling confident after taking that, that poke with your gun, and you have an aftermarket choke. I've just got the standard. I guess that's probably the full choke.
Full choke, yeah.
Yeah, that came with mine. So different choke, same gun, but different choke. And we knew it was a long ways, but we thought it was going to be within range. So sure enough,
it was also a little deceiving because the turkeys came out at that point. It was clear, it was open.
So Perry could see him now.
Yeah.
Yep. So and Evan said the same thing. He said, "Be ready for a follow-up shot," right? And so they finally come in view. I get to see him, and he's just first got his little head up. I just see basically his head and kind of the top third of his neck. And Evan said, "Wait until you can see his full body." And kind of do the same thing that he did, where you put it, basically put the bead at the base of his neck, and that way your kind of your barrel is pointed more at the base of the neck and the vitals. And again, I felt good. I felt steady, and so that's what it did. So eventually, he worked up. I saw his whole body, and I torched off on him, and very clearly missed. He ran a few yards. I jumped up and got set again. It was like, shoot again, shoot. And I shot again, torched off again, and it looked like another clean miss. And they wound up, the hens took off flying back kind of the direction
they ran first. Those gobblers ran over the hill. They didn't spook that bad, to be honest, Carter. I mean, they ran away, but they weren't hauling ass. Like when a turkey's in a dead sprint, their heads go out at an angle.
Yeah.
They weren't doing that. Their heads were still bobbing, and they just, I guess they weren't running away. They were trotting away.
They got a dodge, but they weren't.
Those hens didn't fly for a while. And so Perry and I are like, look, we're sitting there talking. We're both standing up at this point. We're leaning on the gate. The hens can't see us. We can't see them because they're in that death lane. And honestly, I think we both kind of blanked out about the hens and didn't really give a shit anymore. We were both frustrated. I feel terrible at this point. I'm telling Perry, like, man, I should have told you to wait. I was feeling confident because I just made a long shot. We thought they were closer than what they turned out to be. Perry ended up ranging it. It was like 75, which I know I know the listeners are going to be like, y'all are a bunch of unethical assholes. I'm sorry. Like we made a mistake, right? Like we're not too proud to admit we made a mistake.
Yeah, we went back and got our stuff later, and I just wanted to know. I was like, man, because I got up, and when I stood up, I was like, ooh, you can clearly see how it goes down and then kind of back up on that spur ridge,
and when we stood up, you can see all the terrain. But when we were knelt down, we were like on a ridge looking to another ridge. So that looking like straight line, it was a little deceiving. It sounds like excuses. We're not trying to make excuses. We fucked up. We know we fucked up. We were sitting there talking. Well, then the hens fly.
Yeah, the hens took off.
We were like, they flew the opposite direction. And so we're like talking about the game plan. He's like, what do you think? And I told Perry, I was like, we're not out of the game, man. We still had, it was 10 something at that point. An hour probably went by. And I told Perry, I was like, we're not out of the game. They were with those hens. They're going to try to relocate to those hens. 100% they're going to try to relocate. And as we're talking, Perry points, like I went to, get the decoys, and we were going to get all our stuff up because our gear was scattered at this point because we dropped everything and we had decoys out. And we're like going to consolidate and then get together a plan. And Perry points, and I throw up my binos. I went and got my binos, and sure enough, I see that one of those longbeards where he had dropped down and he was going up the hardwoods on a adjacent ridge. And I was like, is it just one? Perry's like, yeah, we watched him disappear. And I told Perry, I was like, well, maybe you did hit that one and he, ran off and he died, or he's wounded on that backside. I was like, so let's go make a play over there and see if he's over there. And then as we were like doing that, then we saw him, and he was clearly not wounded, not hit at all. And he was running the same distance.
He followed the first one up that hardwood knoll. So then at that point we had a decision to make, and it's like, we're standing there. The hardwood knoll was right in front of us. The first kind of ridge back to the right where they came from. And then the other ridge is now back to our left. And Evan was like, well, we got two choices here. We're not going to go straight at them, right? That's a non-starter. You can't do it with the terrain and they're right up there. And Evan, based on his experience last year, he felt like they wanted to be up there on that hardwood knoll. It was high. It's a high spot. It's probably the highest spot in this little area. So we could either circle back to the right, which was the direction the hens went, or we could circle back to the left. And he was
a lot of the other part of this for listeners is, like I say, using terrain. And to the right is open. There's no cover. So we would be moving in the sun through open hayfields, which again, there's nothing but ridges, farmland, open hardwoods, some little pockets of thick pines. But if you're in the woods around there, you can see hundreds of yards into those hayfields. Yeah. So the reason we ultimately decided to go left is we were going to have more cover to try and strike something up and make a play.
Yeah. And it was not the direction the hens went, but we were like, well, the gobblers left the hens. They'll probably try to reconnect with them at some point, but they went different directions. So let's just go to the left, use our cover, and head that way. And we'll see if we can, use the last couple hours here before it gets noon. I can only hunt till noon at this point in Virginia. And so that was the direction we went. So we went back, circled back around to the left. And there's a steep ridge that runs, after we circled around, kind of runs parallel and takes you kind of back that direction. The top of it is wide open. These are not hayfields at this point. We had to cross a different fence. This is not hayfields. This is just pasture.
We were going towards my truck, and I was like, I told Perry, I was like, I need to stop by the truck and have a sip of caffeine because I don't know if I told you on the phone, Carter. I had done a controlled burn. Perry didn't get up there till late, and I started a controlled burn.
Right.
I thought was going to be a relatively quick process. Turns out I had to stay up until 1:30, almost 2 o'clock, babysitting a fire to get up at 5 a.m., to turkey hunt. So I'm sucking at this point. I am wanting caffeine. I did not have coffee that morning because I drank the cold brew the weekend before. I left the last one for Perry. And so I'm hurt. So I told Perry, I was like, do you care if we make a pit stop by the truck? I was like, plus we need to put some waters in our pockets because we're about to do some walking. If there's one thing I learned last year, like we need to fucking hydrate. Going along with our tips episode with Carrie the other night, Carter, like we need to put some water because we're about to do some walking. It's hot at this point. Let's drop some base layers and hydrate. So go ahead, Perry.
Yeah. So did a little pit stop, shook off some layers, got some water and caffeine, and we're going out this ridge. The top of it again is pasture, but because it is pasture and not hay, it falls off steep, and it's kind of there's some woods and timber down there, and then it kind of turns into, before it hits the woods, there's kind of some thick broom sedge. So we kind of got down off the side of it, so we weren't skylined on the top of the ridge, right? Kind of using the topo down in the thick broom sedge. And we're walking along there, just kind of easing along edge of the woods. And that was the direction that we had heard those gobbles earlier when we first set up, right?
That we thought were Jake's.
But we hadn't heard or seen sign of those birds for a while. And so honestly, after the chaos of the missed shots and all of that, it kind of was out of my mind. Those birds, and we're going along, and sure enough, 3 birds just get up, spook. They were fucking right in front of us, man. It was those 3 jakes. They were they were right there in that thick broom sedge, and we had walked right up on them, busted them, spooked them, and they just took off like freaking little helicopters.
The crazy thing is they were in gun range. Had we been, we were trying to kind of quickly get into some cover. You know what I mean? So we weren't being loud and rambunctious and just running,
We weren't creeping.
Perry Perry had a shotgun slung. He wasn't, ready to take a shot. So there was no way he was going to get a shot off.
And it was at that point that I looked at Evan and I was like, I fucking hate turkey hunting. I was like, this shit sucks, man.
You've seen what?
A ton of birds.
3, 4, 5, 8 turkeys. That's a good freaking day, man.
Yeah.
There was no shortage of action, and that's honestly kind of a good summary of my season. Like I've seen a ton of birds this year, been surrounded by action. It's just mostly been jakes, and had been foiled up to that point for the chances at the longbeards that I did have, like taking a irresponsible shot at what turned out to be 75 yards. So the jakes leave, and we're like, well, let's just keep on going. There's nothing we can do about that, right? So we keep on going a little bit further. We stop, and I can't remember. Did you call, or did we just hear?
No call. They were, yeah.
So they were up there on that oak ridge, which at this point is like right in front of us. You have to go down, but then back up, but it's right in front of us, and then we hear a gobble over there, clear as day. It was that direction. It was that gobble was easy to identify where it was. It was right out in front of us. So we're like, okay, those longbeards are probably still right there. They got up to where they wanted to be, and they're still there. I mean, not that much time has passed since I shot at this point.
Maybe 30 minutes, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Probably not even. So Evan was like, well, they're right there. It's like, again, we could go back around. That doesn't make sense. We could circle to the left and get down low, but then we'd be way down low, and that'd be a lot of walking, and we'd have to come up from the other side, and it's more open over there because that's where the river bottom is. And Evan was like, kind of made that mistake last year. I learned that lesson. It just doesn't seem like it's a good approach. He's like, well, our other option is we just go straight, because straight down and straight back up is through thick woods, crossing fences, couple fences, cross a creek, but it's thick in there. They're not going to see us, hopefully. It's going to suck because it's steep. I was like, let's do it. It's not that far. We'll just make the hike. So that's what we did. We went straight down, across the fence, crossed the creek, and just started easing our way up through the woods. And I mean, it's steep, it's slick. But we got up there and got a quote. There's a fence before the woods come out onto this, before it transitions from the kind of the thick woods on the steep hill to the more open hardwoods up top. There's a fence right there. And we got probably 10 yards, 15 yards off of that fence or something.
Yeah. And I told Perry, I was like, let's start slowing it down. And I said, I don't want to crest this hill. You know what I mean? Like, that's the last thing you want to do is crest the hill, especially when there's birds up there. I said, so let's about 25 meters short. I said, we'll stop, catch our breath, listen. I said, and I'll call, see if I can strike them up, then we'll locate them. And so that's what we did.
Yep. And he called, and they responded, and they were right there.
immediately. And they were, dude, when they responded, Carter, I guarantee they were within shotgun range, just on the other
You're
side.
just below the crest.
Yeah.
So we're trying to locate them, and they're up there on top.
We were probably 20 meters from the crest of the ridge, 25 meters from the crest, and they were probably, 20, 15 meters across or on top or like across the ridge. I mean, they were close. So what a turkey gobbles, and you can feel that bass, you can feel the percussion. You could feel it, like you could hear the vibration of the sound waves.
So they call, we're like, they're right there. And so we're like, here we go. So we found a spot to set up. Similar kind of deal. I set up against a tree right there, just on this side of the fence. And Evan was behind me.
Same plan as the last time, using Perry as, I was behind him and a little bit higher.
And I think, did you call one more time?
I called it several times from there. I called 2 or 3 times from there, and I called, and they responded every time. Yep. And then you could hear walking, and you could hear spitting and drumming. And Perry still got a shotgun where they called from last, and I can hear walking from left to right, but his shotgun's not moving. And I'm like, Perry, don't be looking down the barrel. Like, you need to be like, again, the top of this ridge is 20 yards. So, and I told him, I was like, when you're not going to they're not just going to come up, you know what I mean, and stand there. They're going to have their head, and they're going to be looking. I said, so if they stick their head up and they see us and you're not on that direction and you have to move, there's a good chance they're just going to drop behind that hill. And I was like, so they're going to come up quick, and you're going to have a very short opportunity. And so I'm nervous as hell. I'm thinking they're just going to appear, and it's not open. It's thick brush, fence, trees, you know what I mean? And so I'm scouting it. I'm looking. He's looking. And then I call again, and they respond. They were over to the right. So he's shifting, and then I see movement. I'm like, Perry, there's a dead locust. And I'm like, Perry, at the dead locust. And he's slowly moving. I'm like, at the fucking locust.
I still didn't see it at that point. So I'm like just going real slow because I couldn't see it yet. So
I can see them both now. Like, one came out and the other one came out, and I'm freaking the fuck out. So he had my shotgun at this point too. We decided that we were like, I got this aftermarket
switch.
Yeah, it was like, use my shotgun.
So so I finally see the birds. They're over there, the dead locust. I get my barrel over there, and I finally see one of them, and he's right there, right within range. And I mean,
within 20 yards, if not 15.
And I pulled the trigger, and nothing happens. Misfire.
Oh my gosh!
The same thing that happened to me the year before.
I like kind of turned my head. I was like, "Fucking misfired!"
I'm just freaking out.
And it was like, pull it again. And so I pull the trigger again, and nothing happens. And so, like, I guess it just wasn't seated correct. I mean, how many shots are you taking with this thing at this point? Several,
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it was just a little bit dirty or if it just hadn't seated all the way.
It didn't seat, because when you pulled the trigger the first time, you heard the bolt go all the way forward. And that's what happened the first time. Is I think I just didn't have enough oil in it or something. Or I don't know. It wasn't seating the shell all the way. And so learned now that's twice that's happened. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So after pulling the trigger twice and nothing happened, I just slowly pulled it back, ejected that shell, held it, and then rocked another one up, but didn't let it like slam because the bird's right in front of me. And I don't know how this bird didn't spook, because that was still movement and noise.
We were hidden. We did have decent cover.
Yeah, we had cover, but I mean, dude, he was right there.
Yeah.
So I ejected that one, rocked another one up, and kind of like hit it with the palm of my hand, and hopefully make sure it was seated. Took a breath, got on him again, torched off, and he fucking rolled, man. And
smoked him.
But I was so like in my head at this point from the 2 misses, spooking the jakes, and then the misfire. He flopped, and he was kind of going down the hill, and I got up, and I was like, I'm not letting this bird get away. So I got up, I ran up there, I got him, and I put another one in him, and I wound up peppering his breast a little bit. I lost a little bit of breast meat, not too bad, but I was like, it's worth it to sacrifice a little bit of the breast to make sure this bird doesn't go anywhere. It is probably not necessary, but anyway, total of 4 shots later, and less than an hour from the time it took the first shot, had a bird on the ground, man. And
that's
literally 15 minutes, probably 15, 20 minutes after I just looked at Evan and said how much I hate turkey hunting. I was like, I love turkey hunting.
Yeah, having a misfire with him that close, man, that's insane.
Yeah, I in my head, I was thinking, oh my God, I feel terrible because he's using my gun. You know what I mean? Like, but it worked out. It turned out to be a great day. Lots of highs, lots of lows, but ultimately really good highs.
Sure enough, it was like 11:15 by the time all that happened, and we had 2 birds on the Cox farm after Evan got cursed out there last year, and in one morning lifted the curse of the Cox farm and killed 2 really nice longbeards. The spurs on the one that I killed, man, are insane. They're crazy.
Yeah,
they're absolute talons.
I truly have never seen Easterns with spurs like that. Granted, I've only killed 15, you know what I mean? But I wanted
little humble brag there.
Well, it's not as many. It's not as many as a lot of people, you know, who've been doing it their whole life. But
it's fun, man. Yeah. I love it. I love turkey hunting.
It was crazy, man. Like, I know we don't have time to jump into the rest of my stories, Carter. We don't really need to. But the one thing I want to say is what's crazy is out of the 5 turkeys I've killed this year, and the one we got, Perry, only one was a traditional turkey hunt in the sense of like calling it in. The other 4 I've killed. Well, no, the one I killed, I did call it in, but I still, like, I didn't have decoys out. I was still like in the prone and kind of used the terrain and snuck in to where I could shoot that bird because of I didn't have a lot of cover. And so my point in that is it's crazy how successful you can be. And I told Perry this, I don't knock on anyone that uses the reaping technique. I really don't. Me personally, I don't ever think I'll use that because there's no skill in that. You know what I mean? There's 0 skill in walking behind it. At least I don't think so. Again, I don't fault it. But one thing I love about turkey hunting is when you're successful turkey hunting without reaping, it's not because you got lucky. There's some form of skill involved, you know, and like and at least 3 and arguably 4 of the birds I killed this year, like I just outsmarted that bird and stalked it essentially. Like the first one I killed literally stalked this bird using terrain, using cover, and got within 15 yards of it. You know what I mean? Didn't make one call. Didn't call it at all. Saw him and snuck up on it, which is pretty damn cool. You know what I mean? Because their eyesight is impeccable. And to be in, you know, this last one I killed, Perry was telling you, you know, before you hit the record button, like hunted all morning yesterday morning and didn't hear the first gobble, hunted hard, went back to mom's house. There was a break in the rain. I looked at the forecast and I had about an hour and a half window before they were calling for the next big rain coming in. And I just took mom's car down driving. I was like, I just want to see what's out. I know there's some old farms back there. And I've become a big fan of permission hunting. And sure enough, saw this bird out, man. And immediately got on Onyx, saw who the owner was, saw that the address was close. It was right next to it. The house was there. Drove to that house. It was foggy too, so the bird couldn't really see me at all, and couldn't see the car, nothing like that. Drove to this guy's house, knock on the door. I hear some shuffling and a dog, and it takes a few minutes. And this old man comes to the door, and I just asked, like, "Hey, sir, you know, my name's Evan, and I use the Army card. I was like, I'm from Allegheny County. You know, I grew up here. I'm stationed down at Bragg, though, in the military. I was wondering if I could turkey hunt your farm. I've seen some turkeys out there." He's like, "Yeah, go ahead." I was like, "You care if I park right down here?" And he was like, "No." And I'm wearing my leafy suit. You know what I mean? Like I'm camoed out knocking on this guy's door. He's like, "Yeah, go ahead."
Oh, that's the best.
Oh, it was awesome, man. And same thing, used the terrain. And he was in this hayfield next to this old barn. And I got up to this fence line and caught my breath because I was humping it up there pretty quick. Crossed the fence, jumped a creek. You know, I'm sweating. It's hot, humid, muggy, foggy, rainy. And I did a heavy call sequence. And man, he gobbled on top of it. Me and him went back and forth where he was responding to everything, just gobbling his ass off to everything I was throwing at him. But he didn't break. And I could tell he was just kind of behind that barn, strutting and gobbling. He didn't want to close distance. I don't know if it's because I was so close to him or what. I mean, by the time I struck him up, I was within 75 yards. And so I just there was this cow path that was perfect, and these hardwoods next to this fence. And that barn was on the side of the fence that he was in this hayfield. So I'm on the edge of this woods next to a fence, walking towards this barn with this turkey behind this barn. So basically, I have a big shield.
Yeah.
The barn is just being a giant shield for me. And so I could see either side of it. So if he did come, you know what I mean? And I was calling frequently because he was so responsive. I would call every 5 steps, just some soft yelps, and he would gobble to every single one of them. So, he was telegraphing his position very, very easily for me. I ended up crawling over this fence. I was within shotgun range of this bird, and I crossed the fence without him knowing it, just super slow. Walked into the barn. The barn was open, like where it was like the front of it was open. It had 3 walls, and where the 4th wall would be, it was just like an open bay. And there's some old farm equipment in there, stuff like that. I'm just sneaking through there, and in the back of the barn, there was a place where one of the boards had rotted out, and there's like a foot gap. And I've got my shotgun up. I called right before I went into the barn because I didn't want to call inside the barn. You know what I mean? And when I called, I threw it back over my shoulder, and he immediately gobbled. I could tell he was right on the other side of that back wall. And so I'm sneaking through the barn, and I start just peeking my left eye out like this through that slit. And I see his tail fan. And I'm like, all right, he's there. And so I just like catch my breath, and I'm standing, man. I'm literally, not kneeling. I'm standing because if I would have knelt down where that board was right, I wouldn't be able to see him. So I'm standing, and just like you would in like a tactical situation, pieing off a room, I'm pieing off this hole in the barn. And I wait and I wait and I wait, and I see his head, and he's looking. He's not strutting at this point. And I had my diaphragm call, and I just made some little noise. It wasn't even a yelp on my diaphragm call, just to get him to stick that neck up. And sure enough, he did. And I torched off at, easily less than 20 yards and folded him up right there, man. But it was pretty cool.
Oh man, that's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
So movement's the key, dude, or at least this season.
It can be, you have to be really smart with it, and that's, I tried to allude to that in my tips episode. Like if you're a good woodsman, if you know how to move, if you don't just haul ass across a field, even if it takes you 30 minutes longer to walk across a field, use the woods, especially if you know where a bird is. If you know where a bird is, or you know where he's going, and you can move, you can kill birds with being a very average to mediocre caller,
Yeah.
I will say my calling has gotten better. Like those birds that one that Perry killed. I think we could have killed those birds without a lot of calling, but knowing what calls to use in that situation, like I got them pretty fired up. You know what I mean? Like they were coming. They were looking for us. They were 100% coming. Granted, we got within range of them before we even made the first call, and that was huge. But those calling and knowing like what call sequences to make in that circumstance, I think really got them like fired up and coming in. Because it can be hard to get a bird to commit in terrain. A lot of times they don't want to crest a hill and come over a hill. They'll hang up on top of a hill, But it was, all in all, it's been a damn good season, man. Be tagged out in 2 states that still have. Yeah, it's been good. I'm excited too. Going to go hunt Tennessee for the first time this year. Taking the wife up there. We're going to hunt some public, so that'll be fun.
That's awesome, man. I've got a few days left down here. I got till the 15th.
Yeah.
Need to try and make some time.
Kill that one that was in your backyard.
I was playing with last night. Me and the girls were coloring on the back porch, and I heard him yelping. Actually, my wife heard him. She was like, "Is that a turkey?" I was like, "Yes." That calls.
Yeah.
So I was messing with him a little bit, but it was late. I think they went and got on the roost.
I forgot to tell you, Perry, on the. So when we left yesterday, we were driving back. I know you got it running, Carter. You got a few minutes.
Yeah.
We were getting ready to, or we were leaving. We were on the road driving back to Fayetteville, and we're on Highway 18, Perry, leaving Allegheny, and on this hill, I about wrecked the truck because there was 3 massive strutters on top of this hill. And I'm looking, and Taylor's like, babe. And I look at my tires off the road, and I pull over real quick, and I turn around, and I park my truck on this T intersection where I'm looking at them. And I got the binos out, and I start sweating. I start getting anxiety because this one is so big. I mean, oh man, I told Taylor, I was like, I kind of regret shooting that one this morning because I want to kill this bird. I was like, but I'm going to try to get permission for Perry, and I've got the I figured out who the landowner is, Perry. But this bird, you know how like in the Midwest, where in like a lot of that big ag country, you'll see Easterns that just have a crazy thick long beard, like their beard almost it's almost like oval shaped. It comes out so thick. And dude, I guarantee it was 12, 13 inches hanging. And there were the other two were nice birds too. But this one and you could just tell his body was bigger than the other. Just a freaking stud of a bird. And I started door knocking. I went to 2 different houses, got the property owner's name. So I'm going to try to track him down for the next time we're up there, Perry, and try to get some permission on that land.
Hell yeah.
So even if I can't kill him, I'm hoping to get you or Taylor on him. If one of you two, we can. there was. I was drooling watching this guy up there. We added about 45 minutes to our trip for me to drive around back roads on X, looking at property owners and knocking doors, and so
heck yeah,
it can
all
be
good
beneficial.
signs.
Yeah, it can be beneficial.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you guys are on a hot streak.
Yeah. It's surreal to be what is this, 3 years in a row, Perry? I've tagged out in 2 states.
Yeah, I think so.
It's nuts.
People might start thinking he's good at this, Perry.
Perry, this could happen for the next 2 decades, and he's be like, nah, it's all luck. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate it, guys. I hope hope you guys have some more success. If you venture out in the woods, good luck in Tennessee, Evan.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited for that. That ought to be a good experience, going into a blind piece of public with the wife. I ordered a turkey choke for the 20 gauge. I've actually got the 20 gauge torn apart. I've been cleaning, detailing it, and putting new ejector in it because I've had some trouble with it ejecting when I was squirrel hunting with it. So
no misfires.
Yeah,
no misfires. But even if you do, might still be able to make it happen.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Heck yeah. Listeners, hope you guys are having some success in the woods too. Send us your pictures.
Yeah, for sure.
If you've killed some turkeys, send them in on the Instagram page, Hunt Lifty Podcast. And we want to see them and share them. So send those in.
Faux show. Yeah.
All right, boys. I appreciate it. Y'all have a good day. Listeners, as always, appreciate the hell out of you guys. We'll talk to you next week.